Ambassador Sarwar Naqvi, thank you very much for giving me the honor to chair this session. The topic is South Asian strategic environment, and I am very privileged to have a very distinguished group of speakers. First of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal. He's a professor of the Qaid-e-Azam University, renowned scholar, and has lectured in several places, including NATO training schools in Germany and in Italy. And he is frequently a speaker at international conferences. So he will be the first one to go. On my right is my very dear friend, Ambassador Ashraf Qazi. He has had a very, very distinguished diplomatic career. I think maybe 6 or 7 key ambassadorial assignments. And he's also been the UN Secretary General Special Representative in Iraq and in Sudan. Both very distinguished and important positions. And of course, we all know that Ambassador Ashraf Qazi is a prolific columnist. He writes very frequently on national and international issues and also regional issues. And he writes quite fearlessly. So I will, of course, the third speaker is Khalid Anori. He's had a very distinguished record in the Pakistan Air Force. He's highly decorated, and he has been working with the SPD. He's been in charge of the ACDC, and another very outstanding speaker. He's also lectured at various universities. I will now request, as you all know, that unfortunately the security environment in South Asia has been extremely disturbed, but it cannot be seen in isolation. In fact, even the global strategic environment is in a flux. So I would request my panelists, colleagues to reflect on these issues as well. India acted, in my judgment, irresponsibly, and of course, only matched by our own irresponsibility in '99 when we took action in Kargil. So I think the overall situation is very complex, very perilous, and even at this stage, both sides are on high alert. So not a very conducive environment for looking forward to peace. I think the Prime Minister of Pakistan has made he handled the situation well in the beginning. He made very statesman-like statements, and he made overtures of peace to India. So I think in this context, I would request my colleagues to, I'll first ask Dr. Jaspal to take the floor.
I'm very much grateful to Ambassador Naqvi and the permission of chair. I would like to speak on this. What is the academic perspective of how, as a student of international relations, I'm looking to strategic environment of South Asia. Let me, with the beginning, I raise this caveat. It is very much anarchical. Anarchy has been increasing in the South Asian strategic environment due to these two major South Asian states' policies. In this context, if you try to approach with the IR theories or these kind of things, what you find is that in the case of India and Pakistan, or in the South Asia, there is an arms race is going on, and that arms race is creating transition in power, and the probability of war cannot be ruled out. You see, presently, a few days back, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan claimed that there was a probability of attack by India on Pakistan. And if we take into account that issue, that means that two nuclear armed states are prepared to go for a war. If they are going for a war, then we cannot rule out the probability of nuclear winter in this region. What I'm saying hypothetically that the probability of nuclear winter in this region certainly leads to us to this conclusion that there is not only anarchy, but there is very much disorder. And this disorder has been further complicated because if you see since a few years, there is no connectivity. The organization like South Asia, SARC, that its meeting was not there. And when we look about these kind of things, what we find that India's this policy to isolate Pakistan in the 21st century certainly is not, you can say, workable. But at the same time, this trend in the international politics is not ignorable. If you see in 2014, Europeans and the Americans announced to contain Russia and Europe. The pivot strategy of the Americans is to contain China and the Southeast Asia. Saudi Arab led alliance to contain Qatar, and the same case is Modi to contain Pakistan. So this is a one trend which we find in the South Asian environment, whether they are able to contain or not, but this trend is very much clear. The second trend is that India's role or India's emergence as a great power. And this emergence, or there was a first time in 2010, had Clinton used the term India as a great power. And from that day to date, we have seen that American policies have been supportive to it. I'm not going into the detail, but those policies have a direct impact on Pakistan or South Asian strategic environment in general. For instance, in this context, when we are looking that when they say India is a great power, India's military build-up, and in that context, definitely, everyone says that they have to check the China, but practically we haven't seen any build-up on India Himalayas. So definitely it creates problem for Pakistan, and within this context, the international community has been ignoring. It has been ignoring the irresponsible behavior of the Prime Minister Modi when he says surgical strike strategy. If we can focus on this surgical strike, he started saying this thing in September 2016. We have seen it became a part of India's, what we call it, Joint Services Military Doctrine, and it was also in April 2017, and again it was reflected in India's Land Warfare Doctrine of 2018. If we can see this kind of things, what happened? That the continuity of these things, we have seen what happened on the February 26th and 27th. So with this, when we say India's drive for a great power, snubbing its neighboring state, but unable to achieve and expose its own military power. But now when we look about this kind of a thing, that a big power in the region, with a big military muscle, and its military reputation has been damaged by losing 2 fighter jets, or you can say reduction of their Scorpion submarine, and at the same time reduction of their missiles deployment, certainly it creates a problem. One can conclude from this development, one can say the ambiguity has been further increased in the strategic environment. The second important thing in this case is that how we look about this arms control, which I referred in the beginning. If I can focus on the arms control, the trend internationally is not in favor of the arms control. We have seen in 2002, ABM treaty was quashed, and then now it is the INF 1985 Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, a quick process of demise, and probably in 2021, a new START treaty would not be extended. So when we look about these kind of things, they are directly having an impact on the South Asia. Why? Because South Asia is very much significant. It's a big region, and at the same time, it is very much connected with the rest of the world. And if we can focus on that, it means that if there is an arms race between the Russians, Americans, or the Chinese, there would be an arms race or build-up between the Indians in India, and it compels Pakistan to go ahead. So that's why it will be definitely qualifies what I said in the beginning, that arms race in the region is going on, and it will be further creating a power transition and creating a trouble. That leads us to another important thing, that if you see that on the one side, as it was earlier mentioned in the previous session also, with reference to the hybrid warfare, And we have seen in this case of hybrid warfare that we have an arrest of Yadav, but the international community is not reacting on it as such, the way they react on Pakistan. Now that also gives us an idea that South Asia is viewed differently, or South Asian actors are viewed differently in the American-led West as well as in the other parts of the world. So I think in this case, in our region, one state's soft power image, India's soft power image, is very much well received in the international community, but at the same time, within the region, this soft power image is creating more troubles. And if I can try to apply now here what generally as a student of international relations, when we analyze the region or environment, we apply the three levels of analysis. If I can focus on the individual level of analysis, the insecurity of the Prime Minister Modi, or the success story of the Prime Minister Modi, that gives me the idea that he will continue with that kind of a mindset. Earlier in the previous session, it was mentioned maybe after the election, the situation will change. I'm not expecting the situation will change. The reason is very simple. In the last 5 years, there was a warmongering, or you can say jingoism, coming from the eastern side. Why? Because after general election, if there is no more election, then you can say that there will be a probability of change. But there are many elections in the state. The first election would be in the near future, the State Assembly election of Kashmir. So definitely, in that election, there will be more violence. And that violence has a direct impact on the Pakistan or in the entire region. Why I'm saying that there will be more violence? Because BJP, whether they will formulate government or not, BJP is determined to quash Article 35A as well as 370. Whether they are able to or not, but Article 35A is in the Supreme Court and maybe they can change it. And we have seen in the recent months that the pro-Indian leadership, like Abdullah or these, they were also criticizing the Delhi government. So by this way, I'm not optimistic about that kind of a thing, that after the election the situation will change. And the way they have raised, and you have to not forget, in our region or in South Asia, that is my final point in this context, that military-industrial complex, it is one of the best regions for them, especially the Western military-industrial complex, or you can say this defense industry, they find market here. And it's a big market. And the way they projected, if I can just submit here, on 3rd March 2019, in the New York Times, very carefully or very, you can say abruptly, there was an article in which they mentioned India as a vintage military. Maybe it was a vintage military, or it is a vintage military or not, but it's a big military, it's a big muscle, military muscle, and Pakistan cannot ignore it. And within the South Asian context, it is one of the strongest, you can say, one of the strongest military powers. But why they were saying? Because they wanted to sell their own weaponry. And if you see, it's very interesting. And that directly impacts the strategic environment of South Asia. If you see that India has a negotiation, it signs an agreement with Russia for the S-400 missile and S-327. Americans had imposed sanctions on Iran when they negotiated similar, you can say, deals with China when they negotiated similar deal with Russia in September 2018. But I heard of what the impression is coming in the literature that India will get the waiver on these kind of things. So it means that this is similar kind of a waiver which we have seen when we were talking about IP Iran-Pakistan pipeline. No state was ready, or whenever any bank or consortium was approaching to invest in that project, there was a fear of sanctions. But when Indians started investing in Chabahar in 2014, there was a relief for the, what you call it, relief for the Indian investment. So by this way, I think that international, regional environment cannot be separated. And South Asian strategic environment is very much influenced by the international development. And in this context, you have to see what the three documents, which we have, or two documents, which are very pertinent. One is National Security Strategy document of the United States, released on 18 December 2017. And one is their Nuclear Posture Review, which was released on 2nd February 2018. In the first, they said India has a role to play in South Asia, Indian Ocean, and beyond. And in the second document, there was an emphasis on the advancement of the nuclear arsenal of the United States, especially investing more in the tactical weapons. If these two things you can now apply on the strategic environment of South Asia, in the first case, that means that they are projecting India with all kinds of things that it has to play a role, whether it's a negative or a positive, definitely that role is not acceptable to Pakistan in certain conditions or in certain environment. The second is that if the Americans themselves are talking about the tactical weapons, definitely there will be some kind of a proliferation, kind of a chain reaction, and definitely in our region these weapons will be coming, or these weapons will be further improved. Having said this, I think we say that the South Asian strategic environment today is very much complex, ambiguous. Violence, probability of the violence has been increasing, and with this, when we say probability of the violence is increasing, both I'm talking about conventional and hybrid warfare, and with this, I can say that we have to be very careful and see the trends in the international environment and try to evaluate the regional strategic environment, because it's too difficult to isolate our regional strategic environment from the international strategic environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jaspal. He has not really painted a very nice picture of the strategic situation in South Asia. I think, in a way, he's got a point. At the global level, there's extreme competition between the United States, Russia, and China. In fact, Russia and China have been identified as the adversaries by the U.S. And there is, of course, there's a burst of activity on nuclear weapons. The U.S. is modernizing, so is Russia, and so is China. So the anticipation that it will have an impact on Pakistan and India in South Asia, and that there will be an arms race. And the U.S., of course, is following a policy of containment in various regions, and whether India will become a great power as the US wants, and whether it will be able to assert its authority and, shall we say, hegemony in the region, not only in South Asia but the Indian Ocean. I would not want to comment on whether the BJP is going to change its position or not, but I think you've got a point there. What I would request Ambassador Ashraf, is to focus on the diplomatic perspective, and especially if you think that India was actually encouraged, did somebody greenlight the recent, shall we say, Indian aggression against Pakistan and Pakistan's response? And whether the international community actually then eventually got scared because of the response of Pakistan. Because in the initial phases we did not see any serious activity on the part of the international community, and some of the capitals, particularly Washington and Paris and London, had taken certain initiatives, and particularly by saying that this was an act of terrorism and that India had the right to self-defense. So, would you please, you have 15 minutes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'd like to thank my good friend Salman Naqvi for having arranged this very important gathering and for bestowing this honor upon me to come and participate as a speaker on this very important subject. I shall begin on an act of disobedience to my very good friend and chair, but I will take up the point you made, because I was planning not to give a conventional diplomatic presentation with regard to the strategic environment, but to try and approach the strategic environment from a somewhat different point of view, which contextualizes the India-Pakistan relationship in particular, which is a large part of the South Asia region in every way. But also, while much more frightening, the larger context is, it might just be what is necessary to progressively transform the India-Pakistan relationship from a zero-sum relationship to a less, I won't go into and immediately say positive-sum relationship, but a less zero-sum, which means positive-sum relationship, because we share the same fate. Ultimately, if we do not rise to the occasion with respect to the survival challenges that confront us, both of us, and in fact, all of the countries of South Asia, including regions beyond. So I will address the strategic environment with respect to the global challenges that face us. What are these challenges in South Asia, which provide the context for strategy, tactics, policies vis-a-vis each other? For one thing, before I enumerate them, I'd like to say that these survival challenges that confront us in South Asia are not exactly specific to South Asia. They are broader than South Asia, and some of them are actually global in extent. For another, these challenges cannot be tackled unilaterally. They can only be addressed through bilateral, regional, and international cooperation. Finally, these challenges, these global survival or regional survival or bilateral or national survival challenges are rapidly developing. When we talk about dangers afflicting the world, very often we automatically think we are thinking long-term perspective. Therefore, the demands of the moment do not have to be contextualized by longer-term dangers and threats. We should, but in practice, busy men, busy politicians, busy leaders and decision makers don't have the time to take account of longer-term factors because they have to respond to immediate or short-term developments which occupy most of their attention. But in the case of these survival challenges, they are not long-term challenges. They are looming challenges. They are impending challenges. They are challenges which are going to change the entire context of the lives of everyone, at least in South Asia, that's more than 2 billion people. So what are these challenges? We're all familiar with them, but we don't talk about them in the context of strategies of the moment. We should begin to do that. They are the threats of nuclear catastrophe, climate catastrophe, overpopulation, the progressive collapse of good governance and human resource development. Human resource development is primarily education, health, and an environment in which human beings can be brought up in a positive fashion, given all the necessary opportunities to develop themselves. Finally, these challenges can only be, if these challenges are not addressed, then the meaning of strategic situations or strategies become somewhat meaningless because they are not with references to the overwhelming threat that confronts us. By 2050, the population of Pakistan will approximate or exceed 400 million people. That is, if drought and desiccation do not displace and eliminate much of the population beforehand. Extreme statement, but a scientific evidence-based statement. These are not vague fears. These are predictions about the world, not Pakistan in particular, South Asia in particular, but about the world in general, and the South Asian region in particular, which is more vulnerable to global climatic change than most other areas in the world. There are other areas which are just as exposed, but this area is one of the most exposed. Can Pakistan, in such circumstances, contemplate being host to a population of 400 million, or possibly 400 million plus people within the next 30 years? Has there been a single cabinet meeting devoted to this question, or a debate in Parliament on this question, not just by this government, but by previous governments? And if the answer is, well, there's some vague reference was made sometime to the other, and it was on the agenda, but I think the discussions lasted about 3 minutes, then that is a dereliction of duty on an enormous scale. And it renders it all talk about tactics and strategy besides the point. Water crises, what are going to flow from these challenges? There will be, in the near future, water crises and conflicts, food insecurities, including famines, unprecedented and unpredictable weather patterns which are going to affect agriculture enormously, raging epidemics as a result of climate warming, global warming, explosive socio-political tensions, even more explosive ideologies based on suicidal irrationalities presented as metaphysical or even religious truths. Civil society may well begin to disintegrate. All these will be derivative consequences of the survival challenges we face unless they are met and contained. They will not just overwhelm Pakistan, but as I said, the whole region itself. South Asia, moreover, is a nuclear armed region. This requires institutionalized political rationality, restraint, and realism if it is not to lethally exacerbate the survival challenges that have already been mentioned. So what is to be done? First of all, it is essential, absolutely essential, to be aware of these shared survival challenges in order to devise strategies of bilateral and regional cooperation to tackle each one of them with the necessary urgency. No thought is given to this, an odd editorial every now and again, or we read articles on this issue in various international journals. They do not penetrate into policy making, strategy making rooms, conference halls of either India or Pakistan or other countries in this region, and indeed in many other regions. Although there's a nascent global sense of this threat emerging, but we don't contextualize our immediate problems with reference to this emerging threat, which is more, as I said, a looming threat, rather than just an emerging distant threat. India-Pakistan relations are rightly seen to be one of the keys to South Asian stability, if only because they are the two nuclear weapons countries of the region. In turn, India-Pakistan relations are crucially, if not exclusively, determined by the continuing Kashmir dispute and the associated human rights situation in the valley. Until recently, these issues were regarded as critically important for India-Pakistan relations, peace and development. But they were not placed in the context of an existential challenge that impacts the survival of the entire region. That is a luxury we cannot afford. We are going to have to approach India-Pakistan issues, including Jammu and Kashmir, and other issues which can disturb the peace from the perspective of the global challenges, survival, the global, regional, national survival challenges that impact all of us. Today, as I said, this reality can no longer be ignored. Does this mean that Kashmir must be set aside or forgotten because of the overwhelming priority we must give to the survival challenges we share? Or does it mean that because of Indian obduracy and refusal to move on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, even when we have dialogue, the fact is that other than in one occasion, in the so-called back-channel talks, the formal talks were under whatever name, whether they were the comprehensive and integrated talks, or the composite talks, or later names given after Uri, etc., and all, which haven't yet led to the revival of the dialogue. But when the dialogue is revived, and we talk on the question of Kashmir, we have never even agreed on what we are talking about. The Indian concept of Kashmir as part of a dialogue with Pakistan is its own. I don't have to spell it out, you all know what it is. Interference into Indian territory, that's what it is. In Pakistan, we have a totally different perspective. Disputed territory, UN resolutions, right of self-determination. Not one step closer to each other, except for in the back-channel talks where we took a pragmatic stand and said, what is it we can agree on, and come up with some interim understandings, you know. Other than that, dialogue has never led to any progress on the core issue, ensuring that this dialogue cannot last for long. 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, after which, what is the dialogue producing? Nothing. Something happens, dialogue over. Years pass, another round of dialogues commence under a different name, same issues, will sooner or later undermine that dialogue too. There's been no change. So our Prime Minister has very statesman-like, in a statesmanly fashion, said whatever the outcome of the Indian elections, Pakistan's hand will remain extended for dialogue. However, dialogue, if and when it takes place, and I'm a bit of an optimist here, Modi may or may not change, but dialogue is something that is in the offing, I believe, unless some incident interferes. However, what is almost certain, there will be no progress in this dialogue. No progress inevitably means greater tension. Greater tension means sooner or later some incident or the other, which then leads. Now, in the context of these global challenges which I've raised, it is not a question of statesmanship now. It's a question of as awareness develops with respect to these global challenges, which are going to threaten the life of every single human being in South Asia. You know, Pakistan may be primarily vulnerable, but India, despite being a massive country, will be enormously and negatively impacted by climate change and associated challenges, including the risks of nuclear conflict. Will this, if not now, sooner or later, it will begin to filter down into the political consciousness of the people, their leaders, the political process, and some kind of engagement of a more positive nature will begin to emerge for the first time between India and Pakistan, not out of great wisdom, but out of brute necessity. This is the need to survive. However, if we're stupid enough to even ignore this imperative, we shall both deserve our fate. Thank you.